You're listening to The Weather Junkies.
Oh boy. Large wedge tornado heading into Tuscaloosa.
A winter storm warning is in effect for our area.
We can expect at least another 2 to 4 inches overnight. Then that's
The National Weather Service in Huntsville has issued a tornado warning for northwestern Massachusetts.
14 to 22 inches of snow!
All right, good evening. It's just after 8 o'clock on this Wednesday evening. Of course, we have a special guest tonight. We haven't had the show in a few weeks, but we are coming back in a big fashion. Our guest tonight is Paul Kocin. Of course, for those of you that may not know, Paul and the director of the National Weather Service actually wrote a book together. That book is called Northeast Snowstorms. And Paul has a wealth of experience forecasting winter storms. He spent many years at the Weather Channel. Now, of course, if you haven't watched the show before, my name is Tyler Jankowski. I live in Connecticut, and I'm a broadcast meteorologist. I work at NBC Connecticut, and my counterpart here on the show is Dakota Smith.
Hello. Hi, Tyler. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Loud and clear.
Okay, that's great. So I'm a grad student at Colorado State, and my work deals with the carbon cycle. So as you can see, me and Tyler have very different backgrounds, so our views are very different. So that's really the point of the show, and we commonly bring on special guests to add their commentary on certain subjects. And this week we got extremely lucky because we were planning on having Paul on the show before the storm even popped up on our radar, or on our models, if you will. So Paul, welcome to the show.
Nice to be here, and thanks for inviting me to Dakota.
Okay, so we're gonna send it quickly to Tyler to give us a little overview of what the National Weather Service currently has. And yeah, Tyler, take it away.
Yes, you know, one of the things we've been watching as we've gone through today is the issuance of weather alerts. This is the first day that the map has started to light up here in the Mid-Atlantic. For now, you notice here on the Weather Service map that it's the Mid-Atlantic and points south and west that have either a winter weather advisory, winter storm watch, or even a blizzard watch in some cases. Now, not a whole lot of area has a blizzard watch, but it is areas in and around Washington, D.C. Now, there appears to be a winter weather advisory here overlaid on the map, but if I were to guess, yes, that would be correct. The blizzard watch is in the Washington, D.C. area, and surrounding that in the blue shading is the winter storm watch. And as we advance north and east, you notice it does go into New Jersey, but after that, there is nothing once you get past New York City. In New York City and beyond New York City into Connecticut and New England. So right now it's a wait and see game to see for some more confidence here in southern New York, Long Island, and on areas in southeastern New England. So we are waiting to see. It's either going to be a winter storm watch that goes to an advisory, or just a winter weather advisory that gets issued once we get closer to the storm system. So we are monitoring the system as it advances and watching the weather alert map. So nothing really hard yet in terms of warnings in Pennsylvania or New Jersey, but we will see that as we get closer to the storm. So I believe we have Paul on the line. Paul, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yes, Dakota, can you hear me?
I am here.
All right, so I believe we are all connected again in a little bit better quality. What do you sound, or what do you hear, Dakota?
Yeah, Paul sounds good. So yeah, we can get this going. I've been looking at some of the DC historical data and some of their average, you know, what they get every season, and to me, it looks like it's gonna be well. If you know the forecast happens as it's been forecasted, it could be a top 5 snowstorm for DC what do you think about that, Paul?
Yeah, it's got that potential. The problem, of course, with calling a top 5 storm depends on which site you use. If you use National Airport, they've got a 28-inch storm back in 1922, and virtually everything else is in the teens. That's over a long record. If you look at Dulles Airport, the highest is 32.5 over a 50-year record with several storms in the 20s. And if you look at BWI up in Baltimore, their top 10 are all over 20. So anything actually in the 20 range and higher would really be something significant, but not unprecedented. National Airport always seems to have relatively low measurements relative to everyone else. Maybe that'll change with this one.
So the average snowfall in DC area is about 15 to 20 inches, depending on which airport you look at. I think it's pretty fascinating that they could get their entire seasonal snowfall in one kind of dumping. And I was looking at the Capital Weather Gang forecast for this season, snow highs, and their seasonal snow forecast was actually lower than the forecast they put out for this one storm. So I think that probably goes to show us how big of a storm this could be in the next few days.
So I'll add in a question to the discussion. Obviously, as weather junkies and meteorologists, wherever we are, whatever we're doing, we're in tune with what's going on. And if you're listening and you've also been watching the weather models over the last couple of days, there have been some interesting observations. And one is that it seems to me, at least personally, that the Euro was one of the first to indicate a little bit of a suppressed snowstorm. I'm speaking from a Connecticut point of view. Now, obviously, the GFS shows that as well. But we've really been honing in on the ensembles, and obviously, that's the big push nowadays. Could you comment on how the ensembles have been with this storm, both in terms of the American and the European side?
Yeah, I actually wrote a little bit something in this morning's discussion. One of my colleagues actually showed me a couple of diagrams which showed that over the last 48 hours prior to this morning, there has been a southward trend on both where the surface lows are actually moving, and also a southward trend in the models, not in the storm, but in the models depiction of where the storm was going to be in the total precipitation distribution, which is why initially forecasts for Connecticut and Massachusetts were very, very high, and now they have sort of trended more southward. They're not completely out of the woods, but they are not as much in the game as they had used to be. So I think that's what we're actually seeing in the ensemble. So that's been a trend, even though the models themselves have actually been quite consistent. It's those kinds of small trends that can have actually a huge difference, and it seems to be in this case.
Yeah, it certainly had a noticeable impact on us here, especially given that our biggest storm in the Hartford area is a whopping 1 inch, and it was all sleet back in December. So we're anxious for snow. I don't want to speak for everyone, but the snow lovers are definitely anxious for snow. If you had to pick one location, no, it's still a few days out, one location that sees the highest amount of snow, where would that be?
Just west, southwest, in upward hilly regions of western Maryland and northwestern Virginia. Not far western Maryland, but just far enough central Maryland.
Maybe I think vicinity of Hagerstown?
Hagerstown towards Frostburg, towards Frederick. Somewhere in between that towards Winchester and north central Shenandoah, Virginia. Farther south, that's where we get concerned more about mixing issues. But that's actually a sort of a topographical area that in recent storms they've sort of maxed out more when it looked like there might be larger amounts farther east.
In your opinion, with the northern edge of this storm, I know in some situations we don't know how it ultimately works out until it's actually done. Do you think we'll have a decent handle before the storm hits in southern New England, or do we have to wait this one out?
I think you have to wait this one out.
Words from the wise.
Right, words from the wise. We can always say, and we often do, oh, we'll know by the next model run. Well, maybe not. Especially when there is such a mesoscale edge to the snowfall distribution where some of the heaviest snow could fall so close to where there's no snow. And if you don't have that position exact, and we don't, of course, just a small shift. And, given all the model solutions there, which model shift are you going to believe that's where I think that uncertainty, unfortunately, once the storm develops, we'll go like, that's where it is. And then there will be all the, well, this model showed it. No, this model showed it. But I think through that time, that's where we're going to see all the disagreements. And I think there's going to be uncertainty in that location unless we get really, really lucky. With all these model solutions, very hard to have unanimous agreement. It just doesn't occur.
We definitely value your opinion that you just gave there. One thing that is in the back of New England in area meteorologists' minds is last January around this time. We don't like to bring it up, but it was a difficult forecast that we ultimately didn't figure out until the very end. So we're extra cautious, and we've certainly given extra weight to the ensemble solutions in probability, and we've been extra cautious. So I'm hopeful that it works out this time around.
Right. I think people have to understand during the course of any forecast event, and this one is going to be over a period of 7 days and God knows how many forecast cycles, there will be parts of those forecasts in many times where some of those forecasts will actually be quite easy. And I think I live in one of those areas right now. No matter what the models are doing, we still get sort of clobbered. Now, it hasn't verified, but there are other locations where the forecast is always going to be very difficult. And I just think that's the nature of the beast. And this is in a very well forecast storm. There are others where the models are jumping around all over the place. It is much less predictable. I think we don't have a good handle on how do we identify these storms that have predictability issues that like this one is more predictable versus some other storm where a day before, like December 26th, 2015, we were getting some large variability from model run to model run. So there's still plenty we don't know.
So, Paul, I was curious if I could. We might be rehashing a little bit, but a few of the viewers said they couldn't hear us at first. So, I'm just gonna, if it's okay with you, I'm gonna throw out a few areas, and maybe you could give us your best stab at how much you think they might get. Is that okay?
Oh damn! Excuse me.
Okay, so.
I'll do my best.
Okay, all right. Well, let's start with your location right now, DC, Baltimore area.
Right now, I think sort of the consensus forecast is 12 to 24. That's the easy one. So I'll stop right there.
Okay, let's move up 95 into southeastern Pennsylvania, Philadelphia. At
least 12 to 18. I'm not all that certain. I haven't, it's sort of, I don't have these things memorized, but go on.
So the uncertainty grows as we move north, where that northern kind of shield is going to stop.
Right. If you asked me Baltimore, I would have said 12 to 24. Thank you. And actually, you're going to ask me probably about Richmond. And to be frank, I have not really considered it that much.
Right.
I've worked medium range. I haven't worked winter weather, so I'm not really sure. But I know that's an area where, oh my God, it could be all snow, or we get the mixing issues, and that's where the uncertainty also increases south. Northern Virginia, clobbered. Central to Southern Virginia, maybe not so much. Western Virginia, probably a lot.
So
24.
Yeah, so let's keep on moving up 95, and we're going to go to an area where they haven't actually issued, the National Weather Service hasn't issued a watch yet.
Right.
And I think the main concern in this area, we're going to New York City, may not be the snow, but it might be the wind-driven snow. Could you comment on that?
That's the area where this gradient gets going. And I hate to say this is why they haven't issued a watch, because I think it's reasonable. They might get 3, they might get 15. And depending on where in the city, too. If you're in the northern suburbs, you have probably a better chance of less. I don't know if that's going to happen that way, but that's thinking now. Or southern suburbs, they get more. Now, if that band is farther north and all bets are north and New York actually gets into the real big snow, there's still a small probability of that. But what I'm saying in 3 to 15 basically is not a good answer, but unfortunately we just don't have it. I don't have it nailed down yet. That's where the forecast is hard.
One thing
go ahead, Tyler.
I talked about before we began the show was the B word, blizzard. So a small area has a blizzard watch now, but it's pretty obvious that a large area will have strong winds. I would suspect that the question is, where is the snow going to be and how heavy is the snow going to fall? That plays into it. What can you add to the discussion as it relates to not a whole lot of snow, but a lot of wind? Because I think a lot of media types automatically jump up and down and think you're going to get dumped on, when that's not the definition of a blizzard.
Right, but I think the reality with this storm, it's more the case that we know there's going to be a lot of snow. The definition of blizzard is unfortunately a technical term, which is, I hate to say it, it's kind of dumb. But it's the way it is, and it has a requirement that it needs winds gusting more than 35 knots for at least 3 consecutive hours, blah, blah, blah. If it's windy and it's snowing and it's continuous, well, if it looks like a blizzard, it's probably a blizzard. This is the kind of storm where anybody who's in that heavy snow area that is also going to get the strong winds, particularly closer to the coast, closer to the Chesapeake Bay, closer to the Atlantic Ocean, if they stay snow, there's more likely to experience blizzard conditions simply because the winds will likely be higher. Locally, you're still probably going to get blizzard conditions, even in places away from the coast, simply just because some of the winds with this storm are probably going to be pretty high. So it's hard to know all this stuff. It's like, so like technical. If it looks like a blizzard, feels like a blizzard, is it a blizzard?
I love that answer, and that's not a common answer that you'll get from a meteorologist, but I definitely echo that. We have a viewer with a question here. It's definitely in my backyard, but they really want to ask it. So they're looking at the lower Hudson Valley, north of New York City, and he's curious what kind of snowfall he might see there.
That's where it's like, oh, I wouldn't want to be you. Because you're in that nether zone where you could get totally screwed, or like, look at this. We picked up 6 inches, 10 inches. It really is going to depend where. And I got to be honest, I don't know exactly where that is right now. If you ask me Albany, it's like, okay, Albany's out of it. All right, easy one. That's an easy one. It looks like they're going to be out of it. But along that northern edge, that's where this forecast gets really tough. And, if you want to give a number, give a number. I could give a number for New York. If you were to pin me at 15, I'll give you 9. Basically, since I don't really know. So we'll find out.
So kind of extending that conversation we had about the wind, where do you think we could see the strongest winds with this system, and over what value?
Okay, well, since this storm's going to do much of its deepening along the southeast coast up towards just off Norfolk, Virginia, the surface high to the north of that isn't going anywhere. So the pressure gradient between that developing storm and that sort of constant surface high is just going to generate a really long fetch across the Atlantic. So basically the mid-Atlantic coast from Virginia, Maryland, into New Jersey, that's probably going to be where the strongest winds are going to be. Now, just because this is actually going to be a really large system, it's going to cover a large part of the Atlantic Ocean, not only the wind's going to be strong out over the ocean, but coastal flooding potential, my guess, and I'm not an expert on that kind of stuff, it's probably going to be pretty large, especially with a long duration storm like this. So even along Long Island, southern New England, very strong winds, again, I don't know the values, but probably up over 40 miles an hour in gusts, maybe 50 miles an hour in gusts, are certainly a possibility. But I think the main impact is going to be from New York City south towards, coastal Virginia. That's where we can see some of the strongest winds. Even on Chesapeake Bay, they could be quite high for an area, gusting to 50 miles per hour and higher.
So we had one more question from a fan online, and he asked if you could ask Paul about his thoughts on the suppression shown, especially with the 18Z GEFS ensembles. I think we kind of touched on that, but maybe just give one kind of final bit.
Okay, I left work at a time where I did not see. Oh, I did see the 18Z GEFS ensembles. I didn't see the European ensembles, and I haven't seen the 18Z run of the GFS or the NAM. So I can't talk to that, because right after I get off this call, that's probably what I'm going to look at. But even if there are changes, think of it this way. We have another full round of model cycles to go through this evening, another full round of model cycles tomorrow morning, another round of model cycles tomorrow evening, before the significant weather on the East Coast really begins. It'll begin in the Tennessee Valley. There is still an awful lot of information we're going to be getting as we get closer to the storm. And, during that time, there may be, changes that are unanticipated. We'll just have to see.
So we're gonna take you off the hot seat here, because we had a lot of questions from our viewers, and we wanted to get that to them and talk about the storm. But from my perspective, I grew up watching you on the Weather Channel, and I think a lot of meteorologists who are my age, in their lower 20s, probably did and were impacted by some of the things you did, because when we saw you on the Weather Channel, it meant we were going to get out of school.
And that's the bottom line.
No, but you certainly had an impact on me. So I wanted to know. I've read your book, and I wanted you to just explain kind of the experience you had as a kid. You mentioned the February 1969 storm. I was wondering if you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, well, I was a kid who had a lot of hobbies. I went from one hobby to the next. I drew stuff. I drew bridges. I liked the dinosaurs. I had all these different things. I went from one to the next to the next. And at some point, I think it was around the mid-'60s, I started let's look at the weather. So I used to get the New York Times, and I look at the weather map, and like, oh, this is kind of cool. And it just so happens during this important developmental era, the 1960s, that kind of just like now, it seemed like every winter we would always get seemingly a big snowstorm on Long Island. So I think that kind of like did it for me. If I grew up like in the 70s, you know, I'd be some boring accountant or something like that right now. Not to diminish accountants, but I could have been a contender. So I think that just growing up during this era when there was, you know, unusually it was colder than average for a while, and we had a lot of big storms back then. That was what drew me into the field. That's probably what's going to draw a lot of people in the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast into the field over the last 15 years. Of course, there's also been an uptick of big storms, and there are some possible reasons for that, maybe not. But those were the things that really kind of just got me going. I just loved, you know, back in '69, you know, this is a memory I still have. It's 46 years ago. Looking out the window or waking up in the morning and just seeing this glow outside my window. And it's like, oh, could it? You know, I had the bug then. And then you open up and it's like, holy cow, or other expletive. And, you know, just the forecast couldn't keep up with it. And the fact that the forecast couldn't, it was just so dramatic. And it was so earth changing. You know, you go through life and it kind of looked the same. And if you lived in northern Canada, snow on the ground also would look the same. But for a kid growing up in the Northeast, you know, snow was not a common occurrence. It occurred, but the big ones were something special. You know, probably in that, you know, just on that, just something about the wind, the heavy snow, the way it made all the surroundings look like, you know, completely different, you know, very interesting shapes. And, you know, it really stirred my imagination, and it did its damage. Here I am.
As someone and as a couple of people on this show, two people particularly, that watched you many years ago on the Weather Channel, and as you just described, you've seen a world of change in the world of meteorology. In your opinion, where do you see this ship going? Whether it's in terms of modeling or forecasting, or what is your thought that comes to mind often? What are you thinking about in terms of the future?
Right. This might not sound palatable to a lot of people, but given the advent of some very good models, many versions of them, and the fact that I am a human being, I cannot look at all these different models all the time that they're updating. It's data overload. What I see happening are schemes that try to extract that information as best we can, looking at with some very smart imaginative mathematics behind it, determining sort of what combination of models have the best track record, just seem to do the best in certain situations. That's where I see it heading. And I think that's actually where the Weather Service on some level is going, in that it becomes a little too difficult for any human to sort of make sense of that without understanding the nature of all these forecast models and probabilities and the ensemble predictions. And at some point, we are going to, you know, I hate to say, you know, revert to the machine, but we are going to have to rely on them more. And then the day of the storm is where we become decision makers, where we see things happening that don't look like what our modeling says, and we as meteorologists have to adjust that. So I see us becoming more communicators, more decision makers, more determining what's important as the event is drawing really near, and kind of leaving it up to smart tools. I don't know what else to call them. And again, I think this view is not going to be popular. But I just, in my personal sense, say, there are times where it's like I'm overwhelmed. There's just so much to look at, and I don't see it dropping. I just see more and more information becoming available. And a lot of that information is going to be pretty good. Some of it won't be. So those are my thoughts. Okay.
So that, that's very interesting. I've never heard that opinion on the future of forecasting. So bringing it back to the human level, for some of our younger audience members out there, what has been the most important skill throughout your career that you've had to use?
Right. The funny thing is, for me, I'm not a skilled mathematician. I'm good at arithmetic. Just really sort of is more in. I have very good eye-hand coordination, so when I see things, I can picture things going together. I really love. Quickly, so I'm able to I can update. Something's not working out. This doesn't look right, or something's not working out to what I expected from the models. I'm kind of a nice little computer myself that way. But I think everybody's got sort of different skill sets, and that kind of skill set right now is mine. So between being able to detect patterns that I think suggest where significant things are going on, whether it's heavy snowfall, bands, or whatever related to sort of the dynamical underpinnings, that's kind of my spot.
All right. Well, it has been an enormous pleasure to speak with you this evening. Of course, the storm looming. We're lucky to have you in an active time, so we can't thank you enough. And I think Dakota and I's parting question before we conclude is simply, how excited are you for this storm?
I'm excited and I'm exhausted because there's so many requests and so much information and so many things we have to do. I'm working this particular winter weather desk tomorrow. I'm looking forward to it. However, there are going to be conference calls with local office. There's going to be coordination with emergency managers. The director of the weather service is going to be on board. There's going to be lots of media interviews. It's very exciting, but it's also very taxing. And it's kind of hard to keep your eye on the ball of what's going on. As long as I feel like I've got a good sense of what's happening, and I'm comfortable in what I'm seeing to make, a good call, that's what's going to be important. We've sort of moved out of the range where it's like, well, maybe, we're looking at maybe, some accumulations that are really large, to where we have to come up with the most highly probable numbers that give people some real information. So the next couple of days will be determining sort of where the certainty continues to lie, where the uncertainty continues. And with certainty, we certainly can give you an idea of where it's going to snow the most. Are we going to see 24, 30 inches? Where is that? That's exciting. And I love, during the event, I love watching it evolve, to see what's actually happening when you've been sort of building up this, like, what's going to happen, what's going to happen, what's going to happen. So on Friday and Saturday, I'll be at work. I will be in my, that means I'll be doing a great job, whatever, but I know just be able to get the stuff that really gets me going and like, wow, to see that stuff happening, that's what I'm excited about. So there you got it.
Well, we hope you can enjoy it, and we hope that you stay safe. And we'd like to thank you one last time for joining us tonight. Thank you, Paul.
Sure. Thanks.
If you're new to the show, you can follow us on Twitter at the WX Junkies. We're on Facebook. You can find the show on iTunes and Stitcher, and hopefully we'll be back on SoundCloud very soon. Tyler.
Yes, for myself, Dakota Smith, and of course, Paul Kocin, thank you for listening to our podcast. You can listen to it back anytime on demand on our YouTube channel. Just search for The Weather Junkies. And you can also find us on Twitter at the WX Junkies. Have a great evening. Enjoy the storm, and we'll be back next week.